Hey everybody, so I got a really good response on the first on writing video, and I'd like to continue doing more of these. So, keep your questions coming and I will be glad to answer them, at least from my perspective. And so, the next big question that everybody asks, and this came up quite a bit, was characterization. How do you write good characters? And somebody asked a really good question that serves as a framing device for this entire discussion. And that is, what do I think of the scene, the setting, the location, the setting of the story being a character? Can the setting be a character within the story? And the answer to that is not really. But hold on to that thought. We're going to get into it in a little more depth later on. So, the first thing you have to understand about writing characters is that you are never writing literal people. This is one of the things that makes historical fiction so difficult to write, or not, I shouldn't say difficult, it just makes it such a very fine craft. You have to be very careful with how you do historical fiction, because you're taking actual people and making them into characters. And the thing is, characters are not just avatars within the story. Characters embody specific values, specific thoughts, specific concepts, specific philosophies, specific goals, all of that, and what sort of person they are within the story is determined by whether or not they are in line with or how close they are to being in line with the values that the author is trying to impart in their story. So it's kind of like, take Star Wars for example. What are the values being espoused in Star Wars? The triumph of the individual against the collective, the vast faceless collective, the triumph of freedom over tyranny, the triumph of the triumph of the people over the cold, indifferent governing body. Those are the I shouldn't say those are the values. Those are the elements that are achieved, the plot themes of the themes rather that go through that plot. So the philosophy there is one that's highly individualistic, highly social, very socially liberal, classically liberal, and one that stands in stark contrast to the philosophies of the monarchy, of the statism, of bureaucracy, that sort of militant, police state militarism, that sort of thing. And so, because those are the philosophies that Star Wars is being written with, or is being written to champion, the good and evil of the characters and the shades of gray in between, because obviously the temptation of the dark side is a major theme in Star Wars, but the shades of gray in between, good and evil, are determined by the overarching philosophy of the narrative. So, for example, to illustrate what I'm talking about, let's take a couple of books with very different philosophies. Specifically, let's use Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand and The Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck. So, in Atlas Shrugged tells the story of businessmen, brilliant inventors, artists, writers, thinkers of all stripes going on strike against the socialism and collectivism that is holding them back, the red tape that is ensnaring them. The philosophy in that story is a championing of individualism, specifically by way of advocacy for free market capitalism and objectivism as espoused by Ayn Rand. So the good guys in that story being a revolt against socialism, the good guys in that story naturally are the industrialists, the thinkers, the innovators, the creators who shun the unwashed masses. Flip that around to the Grapes of Wrath. And who are the good guys in the Grapes of Wrath? Well, the good guys are the underdogs that we sympathize with because they've been run out of their home by the Dust Bowl, and they're wandering across what's essentially become this apocalyptic American landscape. Not literally apocalyptic, but in poetically so. American landscape, hoping against hope that there will be jobs and food and everything in California. And the story begins to convey concepts of collective values, social values, strength in numbers, pride goeth before the fall, these ideas. And so the characters that adhere most directly to those ideas, the overarching philosophy of that book, are the ones that will achieve goodness in the eyes of the reader, and by contrast, those that fail by degrees to adhere to meet that overarching philosophy that's being espoused by the author will fail to be good or will become evil. And I always say by degrees because very few things are ever cut and dry, good and evil. Obviously, using the Star Wars example, Anakin Skywalker the idea that Anakin Skywalker retains that element of goodness through it all is a central plot point, is his redemption. So, a lot of people, interestingly, are perplexed to learn that Ayn Rand was actually a tremendous fan of Victor Hugo, who wrote Les Miserables. Now, this would seem like a very strange sort of influence to have for someone like Ayn Rand, who, after all, was interested in wealthy industrialists, while Les Miserables concerns itself with the suffering of the lower class. Well, what she identified in Victor Hugo and what she loved about Victor Hugo's writing was that he understood this critical concept of character development, and it's very central to writing romanticized characters. And so and when I say romanticized, I mean in the romantic tradition, which is what I usually try to write in, as opposed to the naturalistic tradition. Anyway, so she saw that he was able to write these characters that Jean Valjean represents these very specific values, and these values are his guiding force. He is not governed by random desire, or by contrast, look at Javert, who ultimately commits suicide because he had always based his morality on the belief that the law and what is good were always one and the same, and he can no longer live with the unresolved contradiction in his values. And that's what ultimately drives him to suicide. And so you see, it's the values that the characters embody, and whether or not those values are contradictory to the values that the author is expressing, that determines whether or not those characters are good or evil. Or again, shades of gray in between. And that idea, and again, yes, it's a very Randian idea, a very objectivist idea, but talking about non-contradiction, of course, Ayn Rand believed that non-contradiction was central to one's moral code. That you are good or you are living as a moral person if there are no contradictions in your values, and then you are evil to the extent that there are contradictions in your values. And so that, I think, is a very good litmus test for determining whether or not a character is good or evil, and where they stand in your story overall. Because if a character, you think about it, think about, again, coming back to the Star Wars example. Luke Skywalker and Anakin Skywalker both have conflicting values. And the conflicting value that they both, the problem that Luke Skywalker faces it successfully in the original trilogy, and then Anakin faces it unsuccessfully in the prequel trilogy, is the balance point between personal justice and actual balanced philosophical justice, the actual mediation of actual justice. And what do I mean by that? Well, we see in the prequel trilogy, we see Anakin being gradually corrupted. He comes, as you'll recall, he initially says to his mother, "One day I'm going to free all of the slaves." This is a profoundly good thing. So where does the contradiction come in? Well, it comes in Anakin coming to believe that he is the perfect lawgiver, that he understands and has established an overarching good that works for all people. And we see that start to develop when he comes back to Padme and says, "I found out that my mother had died in captivity to the Sand People, so I went and just slaughtered every single one of them, men, women, and children. They didn't deserve, they didn't deserve to live. They were keeping my mother as a slave." And so at that point, he has gone that extra step to mediate or mete out his justice to people who were just victims of circumstance. Essentially, they were born into this society. They were not directly involved in the slavery, that sort of thing. So he started to apply his sense of justice, his sense of rightness and wrongness, to a sense of absolutism, of an overarching collectivized concept of justice, rather than just say, killing the slave driver who was keeping his mother. He kills all of these other people that were shades of gray but essentially innocent bystanders. And that's why Obi-Wan says only a Sith deals in absolutes. That's a very ironic phrase that he says. I get what he means, obviously, but it's a very ironic phrase because he is essentially making an absolute statement, therefore he is a Sith. But nevertheless, it is this idea that the human element is removed and justice is based entirely on concepts, abstract concepts. So Luke encounters the same, and so unable to resolve that contradiction, Anakin becomes Darth Vader. Luke encounters the same temptation, he comes to the same crossroads. And obviously this is why the original trilogy would have made more sense the prequel trilogy would have made more sense if it had come first, but of course, as we all know, if it had come first, we probably never would have seen the what we now know as the original trilogy. Anyway, Luke comes to this same balance point. He comes to the same point of deciding whether or not to embrace the concept of justice and fairness that corrupted his father. And he feels this profound desire to embrace that because he's seen everything that the Empire has done. He's seen all of the destruction they've caused. He's suffered personally. He's seen his friends suffer, his friends be tortured and killed and kidnapped and all of these things. He's seen all of that. He has this desire to act on his anger and act on his fury. And you notice at the very end, the Emperor is saying, "Strike down your father, do it, give in to your feelings, give in to hate, and abandon, and you'll join the dark side, get your revenge and join the dark side." And where Anakin is unable to make that individualized distinction, Luke does. Luke holds out for there being that spark of goodness in his father, that the person, the good person, that at the core there is still that good person. And interestingly enough, when I see that, I don't think that there's necessarily any good in Anakin Skywalker and Darth Vader at that point when Luke makes that bet of "I sense the good in you." I don't think that I don't think there actually is any good in him. I think what Luke is doing is really kind of an act of faith in a way. It's not faith in his father, it's faith in himself. What he's really saying is, I'm not going to contradict my values. I am going to succeed where you failed. And seeing his son succeed where he failed humanizes Anakin enough that he's able to stand up to the Emperor and destroy him. So that's an example of the profundity of knowing the values that your characters are meant to embody, knowing what they're meant to represent. And the characters, again, the characters will rise and fall based on those values they represent. So, for example, look at my series, The Vessel Chronicles, which I don't have to really put up a spoiler alert for because it's not done yet. But my series, The Vessel Chronicles, look at the characters that make up the central team, the central party, if you will, that's going out and going on this adventure. What does Yuki represent? What does Peter represent? Why is someone with the values of Yuki driven to protect someone, or the character values of Yuki driven to protect someone with the character values of Peter? Why is Captain Kristoff supportive, protective of these two characters, even though he disagrees with their moral compass? Why is Bigham deeply, sickeningly, passionately opposed to all of these characters? What is being represented here? And I can tell you, one of the central themes to the Vessel Chronicles is characters who are consciously aware that the old way of doing things is dying out, and trying to figure out how to carry the values of the old way of doing things forward, while and not compromise those values or not compromise those values and still embrace the inevitable shift of society at large. So you have Yuki, you have Captain Kristoff, who, what does he represent? He represents honor and nobility and bravery and courage and all of these values. And for him, these values have always been associated with the aristocracy, with the monarchy, that sort of thing. So why, whereas he looks at Yuki and sees someone who has these same values, but for incredibly individualized reasons. And then what he's trying to figure out is, why is Yuki protecting Peter? And why does Yuki care about Peter so much when Peter is nothing but a burden to him? And then you have, on the opposite end of that, you have Bigham, who similarly to Kristoff, identifies with the monarchy, the aristocracy, all of that, but where Kristoff is patriotic, Bigham is nationalistic. Bigham is not interested in finding a way to maintain the old values in the new world. Bigham is interested in destroying the new world and going back to the old ways altogether. So those are the and what values does Peter represent? Peter represents compassion, sympathy, empathy for one another, compassion, basic genuine kindness at heart, and which is why he bonds with Carnation, who's a second-tier character that was introduced in the last couple chapters. And so he represents, and that's again the warriors, the fighters from Scharfenklau trying to understand why Yuki is so passionately protecting Peter. And so that's an example in my writing of how characters embody specific values, and they will either rise and fall based on where they align with the values that I am espousing in the story. So, and where that's ultimately going, you will just have to wait, and you'll be pleased to know, by the way, after I get done with the Sarkeesian Effect, I am going to start shopping that story around to publishers. I have a couple of leads on that, and Victor is going to be my illustrator for that when they get picked up. So, anyway, moving back to give you a final example of values begetting the characters. Think about in the Fountainhead, and here I guess you could say there's a spoiler alert. If you haven't read the Fountainhead, stop this video, go read the Fountainhead, and come back. Anyway, think about the Fountainhead is about this similar swath of characters that are by degrees good and evil. You have, on the one hand, the hero, Howard Rourke. Howard Rourke is a man of value. He is a person who has value, and he knows it. Then you have Dominique Francone, who can have value, can aspire to have value, and knows it. Then you have Gail Wynand, who is a man who could have been a man of value and knows it. Then you have Peter Keating, who is not a man of value and doesn't know it. And then you have Ellsworth Toohey, who is not a man of value and knows it. And what will ultimately determine whether or not characters are good or evil within that story is how close they come to mirroring the values of either Howard Rourke or Ellsworth Toohey. And the other characters are caught in the middle. And there are other minor characters that also factor into this, but these are the five prominent characters. So Howard Rourke's values are that what makes him a man of value is that he believes that if you have something in your life that is amazing and wonderful and beautiful, you should put it out there, you should celebrate it, you should externalize it. This little light of mine, I'm going to let it shine. You should just let that light shine. You should be proud of it. You should embrace it. You should be thrilled by it. And fuck what anyone else thinks. That's Howard Rourke's values. Gail Wynand's values, on the other hand, is he appreciates those things of beauty and things of grandeur and greatness. He appreciates all of that, but he believes that it should be hidden. You should hide it away from the world so that no one else can get to it. And we see that embodied when he marries Dominique Francone, and he sets up this world for her where she is basically completely internalized and kept inside in his little world that's full of priceless art pieces and that sort of thing that no one else can ever see, because he's trying to collect all the good things in the world and hide them away from the horrible people of the world. Dominique Francone, on the other hand, believes that if she loves the things of value, she loves the things of greatness and beauty and grandeur, all of that appeals to her, but her belief is that when you encounter something like that, you must destroy it, not just hide it away, destroy it before the horrible people of the world can get to it and corrupt it and mutilate it. Peter Keating has no concept of what is or is not of value. He does not understand the concept of greatness, of character, or of achievement of any kind. And he does not understand, he also has no understanding of what those things are. He is a person who is completely directionless, completely buffeted about by his by his lack of purpose in life. He is a washout, a loser, and he's stuck there. Then you have Ellsworth Toohey, the man who has no value and knows that he has no value, and he hates things of grandeur and greatness and innovation and brilliance and genius. He hates these things because he knows he knows that for him, satisfaction in life comes from seizing on these things and corrupting them. And there's a very haunting, you get a very haunting flashback to Ellsworth Toohey's childhood at one point in the book, where it talks about him going to Sunday school, and he learns what the concept of a soul is. And he tells the teacher, well, if the soul is the thing of value, then one should collect souls. And that's essentially what he does. He collects souls, he collects the goodness, the greatness within people, and destroys it, mutilates it, renders it mediocre, because that's the only satisfaction he knows in life, is to tear down his betters. So why does Ellsworth Toohey latch on to Peter Keating? Because Peter Keating has no idea that he's being corrupted. He has no concept of whether he's being corrupted or not. He has no concept of what goodness is, or what the good is, or what the evil is. He has no concept of any of that. And that's why he's assimilated by Ellsworth Toohey, and ultimately meets his own destruction by that association. Gail Wynand and Dominique Francone ultimately come around to help Howard Roark in different ways. Dominique helps him, and in doing so becomes the closest symbolically becomes as close to Howard Roark as she can get without becoming Howard Roark, i.e. she marries him, becomes his wife. So she gains the most, develops the most as a character. Howard Roark is basically complete as is, which is kind of what makes people accuse Ayn Rand of having Mary Sue's in her writing, but really if you understand how she's writing, it makes more sense why Howard Roark is already this kind of symbol of perfection. So Dominique achieves and develops the most as a character. Gail Wynand almost achieves, but he waffles on on whether or not to come to Howard Roark's defense later in the story. And as such, although he knows that it was the right thing to do, he chickened out, and therefore he falls short. And so you have these degrees of the characters rising and falling based on where they stand in relation to absolute good, which is Howard Roark, and absolute evil, which is Ellsworth Toohey. So anyway, that I think answers what makes good characters. And to then bring that back around to the original question of can the setting be a character? And the answer is not really. Because the setting can be symbolically reflective of the characters, or it can be literally reflective of the characters. If it is symbolically reflective, then it's not a character. If it's literally reflective, then it is a character, which means that it's literally interacting with and representing certain values in contrast to the character. So if you have a literally anthropomorphized setting, then you can say that that setting is a character. So for example, the Allied master computer in Harlan Ellison's I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream is ultimately a character. It is also the setting, but it's a literal character, meaning the setting is the interior of the Allied master computer, this computer that fills the entire interior of the Earth. They are inside of that. They're inside of that character. So it's literally a character, and it is consciously and intentionally modifying itself to to interact with the human characters. Now, what's an example of a setting that modifies itself but is not a literal character? Well, how about the labyrinth in Jim Henson's movie Labyrinth? The labyrinth is constantly changing. It changes to accommodate different messages, different meanings, different psychological states of the characters, but ultimately what it really does is just metaphorically reflect the battle of wills that's going on between I'm bad with names, the Jennifer Connelly character and the David Bowie character. It ultimately just reflects that battle of wills between them. So it's just an anthropomorphized metaphor, but it's not an actual character. There are parts of the architecture that stop and talk, but that's limited to like the doors with the brass knockers and everything. That's limited to those set pieces. So the then you have like an example of a setting that is just it is not interactive at all. It is just metaphorical. It is just symbolic of the state that the character is in. When you have the principal character, the father in The Shining, chasing his family into the hedge maze at the end, that hedge maze is symbolic of, they finally go to the hedge maze because that setting is symbolic of the complete mental breakdown that he has suffered. He's, the path is lost, there's no direction, there's just random chaos running through random pathways. That is just a symbolic symbolic landscape, a symbolic setting, but it's not an actual character. So I hope that answers that question. In any event, I, as you can tell, certainly enjoy talking about the craft of writing, so please, by all means, feel free to keep your questions coming, and if nothing else, I'll think about a topic I want to do next time. Will probably be have something to do with conflict, since that's what stems directly from characterization as I talked about it.